The sad truth about how African slaves were captured. The transatlantic slave trade took away millions of energetic men and women from Africa. The capture of African slaves involved a variety of methods and circumstances, often depending on the region, the time period, and the local socio-political context. Here are the main ways African slaves were captured. 1. Warfare and raids. Many African slaves were captured during conflicts between different African states or communities. Victorious groups often took prisoners of war, who were then sold to European or Arab traders. 2. Kidnapping. Individuals, including children, were often kidnapped by slave traders or local criminals. These kidnappings could happen in isolated incidents or as part of larger organized efforts. 3. Tribute and taxes. Some African leaders and kingdoms, as a way to gain favor or avoid conflict with European traders, would capture and hand over individuals from their own populations or from neighboring communities as tribute. 4. Judicial and debt slavery. People could be enslaved as a result of judicial punishments or to repay debts. This form of slavery was sometimes co-opted by European traders who took advantage of these local customs. 5. Internal African trade. Slavery existed in many African societies long before the arrival of Europeans. Some African states engaged in the internal slave trade and sold slaves to European or Arab traders. These methods of capture fed into the larger transatlantic and trans-Saharan slave trades, which had devastating effects on African societies. The transatlantic slave trade in particular was marked by its brutal and dehumanizing practices, leading to the forced migration and suffering of millions of Africans. People captured as slaves in Africa came from various backgrounds, reflecting the complex social, economic, and political fabric of African societies. The following categories of people were often captured and enslaved. 1. Prisoners of war. Many slaves were captured during conflicts and wars between different African kingdoms, tribes, and communities. Victorious warriors often took prisoners, who were then sold into slavery. 2. Villagers and townsfolk. During raids by slave traders or rival groups, entire villages or communities could be attacked and their inhabitants captured. This included men, women, and children indiscriminately taken from their homes. 3. Kidnapped individuals. Slave traders and raiders often kidnapped individuals from their daily activities, such as farming, hunting, or traveling. This could happen in isolated incidents or be part of larger, organized efforts. 4. Debtors and criminals. In some African societies, individuals who could not pay their debts or who had committed certain crimes could be enslaved as a form of punishment or repayment. 5. Tributes and tribespeople. Some African leaders and chiefs captured or handed over people from their own populations or neighboring tribes as part of tribute, or to maintain favorable relations with powerful traders or states. 6. Social outsiders. People who were socially marginalized, such as those belonging to minority ethnic groups or lower social classes, were more vulnerable to being captured and sold into slavery. 7. Children. Children were particularly vulnerable to kidnapping and enslavement due to their physical weakness and inability to defend themselves. They were often preferred by slave traders because they were seen as more adaptable and capable of being molded to various forms of labor. These diverse groups of people were often sold into the transatlantic slave trade, where they faced brutal conditions and forced migration, or into internal African slave markets and the trans-Saharan slave trade, where they were dispersed across the continent and into the Middle East and beyond.